Action!
My name is Maya Shearer. I'm 18.
My name is Josh Wedderburn. I'm 19.
I'm Max Turner. I'm 18.
I'm B House. I'm 17.
And I've experienced sleep paralysis.
And I've suffered from sleep paralysis.
And I've experienced sleep paralysis.
And I've experienced sleep paralysis.
I would describe sleep paralysis as being in a dreamlike state, even though thinking you're awake. So you're trying to go to sleep and you're in a dream, but it feels so real that you feel like you're awake and everything that's going on around you makes logical sense to you at the time.
I would describe my sleep paralysis as so much more than the average nightmare. I don't really suffer with nightmares very often, but I do suffer with my sleep. I don't get very fulfilling sleep, so sleep paralysis has been common-ish in my teenage years. It's just extremely scary. Like, I feel like I cannot escape it or really get any help during that episode.
I have experienced sleep paralysis numerous amounts of times, but I think the main is maybe about 3 or 4 times I've experienced it.
I've only experienced sleep paralysis once.
I'd say upwards of 10 times in my life.
I've only suffered from sleep paralysis once, and it hasn't really happened since then. Sleep paralysis hasn't really affected me at all, because after I did experience sleep paralysis, it's not something that I've regularly thought about. It kind of just feels like a weird dream to me, and that's kind of how it's always felt.
Sleep paralysis hasn't really affected me because it only has happened once. But after it happened, it did affect me for a few weeks, and I was quite scared to sleep again.
I'd say what caused my sleep paralysis was just lack of sleep, or just not conditioning myself to have a peaceful night's sleep, because every single time that I have experienced sleep paralysis, it's been under some stressful conditions, and then I'll just be thinking about so much in my head that when I fall asleep I've just got so much going on, and then it triggers kind of an episode to then happen.
I think what causes sleep paralysis is either a large amount of stress, or just your body not being regulated enough of a sleeping pattern, or anything like that really. So for example, a traumatic event could perhaps make you have sleep paralysis.
For me, what caused sleep paralysis was the medication I was on. I was on very high amounts of melatonin, and I think that did influence how I was sleeping. I found out it was sleep paralysis and not just normally dreaming, because I felt like it was more real than anything, and when I tried to wake up, I couldn't.
I saw a couple YouTube videos explaining it and about what sleep paralysis was, and I was like, oh, that happened to me. It was about, I think, a year after it had happened.
I think the scariest sleep paralysis I had was I was 16 and I was in secondary school. I was going throughout my day normally, but I had to leave school in the middle of the day to go to a therapy session. And I went to that therapy session and it lasted about 2 hours, and it was quite intense as I had to do CBT therapy. So I came home because I would refuse to go back to school after my therapy, and I tried to go to sleep straight away. It took a while for me to go to sleep as I was in and out of sleep. And when I fell asleep, it was probably about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I could feel my heartbeat so fast, and it was in my head, and it was in my hands, and it was everywhere, and it felt like I was falling just so slowly. And then I could see and hear things in like the corner of my eye, but when I tried to move my head, I couldn't see them, and it was constantly moving and blurring. I don't want to describe it as a man, but there was a very tall figure, and he had a hat. The hat was trimmed, and he pointed it out at me and tried to offer me this hat, and I just wouldn't take it because every time I tried to look at him, he wasn't there, and it felt like he was behind me as well. So he was just everywhere, and it was so surreal.
So when I was like 14 years old, I had a best friend that lived in America. She came and stayed at my house for about 28 days, and I had never really had much issue with my sleep other than late nights and then sleeping through the day. But while she was here and staying in my house, I kind of adapted my time zone to hers, and so I wasn't getting enough sleep. It was evident, and so one day we had got into an argument and we were trying our best to kind of avoid each other. I think it was just too much time in the same proximity of another person. So I had told her that I didn't want her to sleep in my room that night, and I wanted her to sleep down in the living room so that I could have just a night for myself and I could have a peaceful, early-ish night. And then I'd wake up the next day and we'd be all back to normal. But it spiraled into an argument, and so we went to bed on bad terms, I'd say. And I did finally fall asleep probably at about 3 a.m. and I think that she was already asleep at this time. But as soon as I'd fallen asleep, I kind of realised in my head that this sleep was not restful. I felt so on edge. I felt like there was a presence. And then as I was in the slightest bit of sleep, so the stages between being awake and then being in a deep sleep, I was just not relaxing. I was just not like falling into like a dream state or anything. I just felt panicked, and I tried to wake myself up from this state, and I think that I just thought that it was going to be a nightmare and that I was already dreaming. And when I did wake up, which I wasn't actually awake, I felt like I was being completely and utterly tied to my bed. I felt like my body was too heavy to lift myself up, and I felt trapped and like just contained. And I then tried to kind of move my head to look around my room, and as I looked around, my door was open, which I haven't slept with my door open since I was a child. And all of a sudden, like, I could see a shadow approach the door, and it was almost like my friend, who I had just kind of had a falling out with, was standing at the door, but it didn't really look like her. It was a silhouette of her, but she didn't have any of her facial features, basically. She was kind of just like a shadow. And as I looked at her, I thought she needed my help, and then she started to wail and she started to cry and started to say that she hated it here and that she wanted to go home. And I wanted so badly to just sit up and go over to her and like talk her through it and like almost be logical about it and be like, of course you can go home when you can, but like you can't right now. It's like 4 a.m. It's okay. And then it just turned more and more scary to me. I was like terrified and just locked down, and the cries got louder and I could hear my own heartbeat. And I think just as it got worse and she was kind of entering my room and it got darker and scarier, I then woke myself up after trying so hard through the whole episode to wake myself up. I finally did, and I sat there in my bed, and 14-year-old me was just crying her eyes out. I just was so scared of what just happened, and I didn't know why it happened, what it was. why it didn't feel like a normal nightmare and why it was so realistic.